In the harsh winter of 1883, when blizzards could bury entire settlements and the Colorado Territory tested every soul brave enough to call it home, stories traveled on frozen winds about those who disappeared into the white silence, never to return. Some spoke of fortune seekers swallowed by avalanches. Others whispered of families who simply vanished between one town and the next. But perhaps the most heartbreaking tales were of the mail-order brides, women who traveled thousands of miles to marry strangers, only to discover that dreams could freeze as quickly as hope in the unforgiving mountains. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The railroad companies promised safe passage matrimonial. Agencies guaranteed loving husbands, and advertisements painted pictures of prosperous homesteads waiting for the gentle touch of a woman's hand. Yet in the remote settlements scattered across the Rockies, reality often wore a different face. Men could be cruel, circumstances could change overnight, and the very isolation that drew some to the frontier could trap others in situations more desolate than any they had fled. It was in such desperate circumstances that destinies sometimes collided in ways that would reshape lives forever. When the strong found the vulnerable, when kindness met desperation, when a man who had forgotten how to trust discovered a family that needed protecting more than anything else in the world. These were the moments that transformed both the rescuer and the rescued, creating bonds stronger than blood and love deeper than the mountain valleys themselves. The morning that would change everything began like countless others in Pine Ridge, Colorado Territory, with Thomas Bennett splitting firewood behind his cabin as the first pale light crept over Eagle's Peak. The rhythmic thud of his axe echoed across the silence of Whispering Pines Forest, the only sound except for the gentle murmur of Crystal Creek flowing nearby. Tom had built his life around such sounds, the honest work of his hands, the predictable rhythms of mountain life that asked nothing of him except strength and solitude. At 32, Tom Bennett had been living alone on his homestead for nearly 8 years, having claimed the land after his discharge from the Army Corps of Engineers. The isolation suited him well, or so he told himself during the long winter nights when the wind howled through the pines and the nearest neighbor lived 15 miles down the mountain. His cabin, built with his own hands from the timber of his land, stood solid and warm against the elements, but it had never known the sound of children's voices or the gentle presence of a woman's touch. Dr. Margaret Foster often chided him during his infrequent trips to Pine Ridge for supplies, telling him that a man needed more than solitude and wilderness to make a proper life. The town doctor, a woman of 45 who had shocked the community by arriving with a medical degree from Philadelphia 7 years earlier, had become something of a friend to Tom, one of the few people whose company he genuinely enjoyed. She understood the value of independence, having carved her own unconventional path in a world that rarely welcomed female physicians. The town itself had grown slowly but steadily since the railroad spur reached the valley in 1878, bringing with it a steady stream of settlers drawn by timber opportunities and fertile land. James Carter ran the general store with the efficiency of a man who understood that his customers' lives often depended on his ability to keep essential supplies in stock. Sarah Wilson had arrived 3 years earlier to establish the schoolhouse, bringing with her the firm belief that education was the foundation upon which civilized society was built, even in the wilderness. Pastor William Hayes conducted services in the small chapel he had built with the help of volunteers, offering spiritual guidance to souls seeking meaning in the vast indifference of the mountains. Sheriff Daniel Miller maintained order with a combination of common sense and firm resolve, understanding that in a place where help was often days away, prevention was far better than cure. He worked closely with Martha Rodriguez, whose tailoring shop had become an unofficial gathering place for the women of Pine Ridge, where news was shared and community bonds were strengthened over the gentle rhythm of needle and thread. Tom's relationship with these people was cordial but distant. He attended church on Christmas and Easter, traded fairly at Carter's store, and tipped his hat respectfully to the ladies when their paths crossed. But he kept his own counsel and shared little of his thoughts or feelings, having learned during his military service that some wounds healed better in solitude than in the well-meaning but often clumsy hands of others. The morning routine that December day proceeded exactly as it had for countless others. Tom split enough wood to last through the next blizzard, checked on his small herd of cattle sheltering in the barn he had built against the mountain slope, and prepared a simple breakfast of coffee, bacon, and biscuits. The cabin, though modest, reflected his careful attention to practical details. Thick walls provided excellent insulation, multiple oil lamps ensured adequate light during the long winter nights, and a large stone fireplace dominated one wall, radiating warmth throughout the single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A ladder led to a sleeping loft under the peaked roof, where Tom's bed and personal belongings occupied neat, organized space. He had always taken pride in the efficiency of his arrangements, the way everything had its place and purpose. The cabin reflected the disciplined mind of a man who had learned to rely entirely on himself, who had created a world where surprises were rare and complications could be managed through careful planning and hard work. It was a good life, he told himself, even if it sometimes felt as empty as the vast sky stretching endlessly above the peaks. The blizzard struck with the sudden ferocity that characterized Colorado mountain storms, transforming a clear morning into a world of swirling white chaos within the span of an hour. Tom had read the signs early, the subtle shift in wind direction and the particular quality of light that preceded such weather. He secured his animals, brought in extra firewood, and settled into his cabin with the patient resignation of a man who understood that nature would run its course regardless of human convenience. What he had not anticipated was the sound that reached him through the howling wind sometime after noon, a sound so faint and desperate that at first he thought it might be the cry of an animal in distress. But as he listened more carefully, standing perfectly still in the center of his cabin, he realized it was something far more troubling, the sound of human voices, weak and frightened, somewhere out in the deadly embrace of the storm. Tom's military training had taught him the value of quick decision-making in crisis situations, and without hesitation, he bundled himself in his heaviest coat, wrapped a rope around his waist with one end tied securely to his cabin door, and ventured into the blinding whiteness. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The wind struck him like a physical blow, and the snow stung his face with such intensity that he could barely keep his eyes open. Visibility extended no more than a few feet in any direction, and the familiar landmarks of his property disappeared entirely in the swirling chaos. Following the sound proved nearly impossible, as the wind carried voices from multiple directions, creating false echoes that led him first one way, then another. His rope grew taut behind him, and he knew he was approaching the limit of safe exploration when he nearly stumbled over what appeared to be a dark shape huddled against a fallen tree. As he knelt in the snow and brushed away the accumulation, his heart nearly stopped at what he discovered. A young woman, obviously pregnant and clearly near exhaustion, clutched 3 small children against her body in a desperate attempt to share what little warmth remained between them. All 4 were soaked through, their clothing inadequate for the brutal conditions, and the woman's lips had taken on the blue tinge that Tom recognized as an early sign of hypothermia. The children, who appeared to be identical triplets of perhaps 3 years old, were barely conscious, their small bodies trembling violently in the inadequate protection of their mother's embrace. Emma Clark had been traveling for 6 days when the storm caught her wagon train unprepared and scattered. Her husband-to-be, a rancher named William Peterson, whom she had never met, but had corresponded with for 8 months, was supposed to meet her in Pine Ridge and escort her to his property further up the valley. Instead, she had discovered upon arriving that Peterson had departed 3 weeks earlier, leaving word with the station master that he had changed his mind about marriage and would not be returning. Stranded with her 3 daughters and no money for return passage, Emma had accepted the reluctant assistance of a wagon train heading toward Denver, reasoning that a larger city would offer more opportunities for employment. But the early winter storm had struck with unexpected severity, and in the confusion of trying to manage frightened horses and secure loose cargo, no one had noticed when Emma and her children became separated from the group. Now, as Tom lifted her gently and began the careful process of getting all 4 of them back to his cabin, Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling apologies and promises that her children would be no trouble, that they would leave as soon as the weather cleared. The triplets, Lucy, Rose, and Lily, were too cold and frightened to do more than whimper softly as Tom carried them one by one through the deep snow, following his rope back to safety. The process of getting them all inside and beginning the delicate work of treating hypothermia took the better part of an hour. Tom's military experience had included basic medical training, and he understood the crucial importance of gradual warming rather than sudden exposure to heat. He removed their wet clothing with clinical efficiency, wrapping each child in warm blankets before turning his attention to their mother. Emma's condition was more serious than the children's, and Tom worked quickly to assess her needs while maintaining proper modesty. Her pregnancy was obviously advanced, perhaps 7 or 8 months, and the stress of exposure had clearly taken a significant toll. He prepared warm broths and gentle heat while keeping careful watch for signs of fever or other complications that might require more medical attention than he could provide. As feeling returned to their extremities and the immediate danger passed, the children began to show signs of their individual personalities. Lucy, clearly the eldest by perhaps a few minutes, appointed herself guardian of her sisters, checking on Rose and Lily with the serious concern of a child forced to grow up too quickly. Rose observed everything with intelligent eyes but spoke little, while Lily possessed a naturally sunny disposition that emerged even under such dire circumstances. The cabin that had seemed perfectly adequate for one man suddenly felt both overcrowded and oddly incomplete. The presence of feminine voices, even weak and frightened ones, and the soft sounds of children breathing created an atmosphere Tom had never experienced. He found himself moving more quietly, speaking in gentler tones, and constantly checking to ensure his unexpected guests were comfortable and safe. Emma's gratitude, when she was finally strong enough to speak coherently, came mixed with profound embarrassment and worry about their situation. She explained about Peterson's abandonment, their separation from the wagon train, and her complete lack of resources or connections in the territory. Her voice carried the refined accents of education, suggesting a background that made her current circumstances all the more poignant. Tom listened without judgment, asking practical questions about her health and the children's needs, while carefully avoiding any discussion of long-term arrangements. The immediate priority was recovery and safety. Everything else could wait until the storm passed and clearer thinking prevailed. But as night fell and he watched Emma tuck her daughters into makeshift beds near the fireplace, singing soft lullabies that filled his cabin with the sweetest sounds he had ever heard, Tom Bennett began to understand that his carefully ordered world was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, giving the small family time to rest and recover, while Tom adjusted to the reality of sharing his space. He found himself pleased by the gentle chaos of children's voices, the way Lucy helped her mother with Rose and Lily, and the gradual return of color to Emma's pale cheeks. More than once, he caught himself smiling at Lily's attempts to befriend his old hound dog, Rex, who had initially been suspicious of the intruders, but was quickly won over by her persistent attention. When Emma finally felt strong enough to discuss their situation seriously, Tom listened to her plans to continue toward Denver with the growing certainty that he could not simply let them disappear into the unknown dangers of winter travel. These 4 people had brought something into his life that he had not even realized was missing, and as he watched the firelight dance across their peaceful faces, Tom Bennett made a decision that would change everything. The mountain man who had convinced himself that solitude was sufficient was about to discover that some cabins were always meant to echo with the sound of children's laughter, and some hearts were always meant to be shared with those who needed protecting most. The rescue in the snow had been only the beginning of a story that would transform them all. The 3rd morning dawned clear and brilliant, the storm having passed during the night like a fever breaking. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the warming air and casting everything in a golden glow that seemed to promise new beginnings. Tom stood at his window, watching the way the light caught in Emma's auburn hair as she braided it carefully, preparing for what she clearly believed would be their departure. Emma had spent the previous evening mending the children's clothing with needle and thread from Tom's surprisingly well-stocked supplies, her fingers moving with the practiced efficiency of a woman accustomed to making do with whatever materials were available. She had fashioned warmer wraps from spare blankets, creating makeshift winter gear that would better protect the triplets during travel. Her preparations were methodical and determined, driven by the obvious belief that they had imposed on Tom's hospitality long enough. Lucy sat nearby, helping her mother by holding pins and watching the process with the intense concentration that characterized everything she did. At 3 years old, she possessed an unusual awareness of their precarious situation, often whispering reassurances to Rose and Lily when she thought the adults weren't listening. Rose remained content to observe from her position near the fireplace, her dark eyes missing nothing as she studied Tom's movements around the cabin. Lily had attached herself to Rex with unwavering devotion, following the old hound dog wherever he went and chattering to him in the nonsensical but earnest way of very young children. Tom found himself inventing reasons to delay their departure, checking and rechecking the weather conditions, expressing concern about trail conditions that might not be apparent to inexperienced travelers. The truth was that the thought of watching them disappear down the mountain path filled him with an unexpected sense of loss, as if something essential was about to be torn away from his carefully constructed world. Dr. Margaret Foster arrived, unannounced that afternoon, having made the difficult journey up the mountain on horseback to check on Tom's welfare after the severe storm. Her surprise at finding his cabin occupied by a pregnant woman and 3 small children was evident, but her medical training quickly took precedence over curiosity. She examined Emma and the triplets with professional thoroughness, pronouncing them remarkably healthy considering their ordeal, but expressing serious concerns about Emma's advanced pregnancy and the wisdom of immediate travel. Emma's due date, by the doctor's calculation, was perhaps 6 weeks away, making winter travel particularly dangerous for both mother and unborn child. Dr. Foster spoke frankly about the risks involved, describing how even minor complications during childbirth could become life-threatening emergencies when medical help was hours or days away. Her words carried the weight of experience, having delivered dozens of babies in frontier conditions and having seen, too, many tragedies that might have been prevented with proper care and stable circumstances. The conversation that followed between Emma and Dr. Foster took place in hushed tones near the cabin's far window, but Tom could see the distress on Emma's face as reality settled around her like a heavy cloak. She had no money for extended lodging in Pine Ridge, no family to call upon for assistance, and no prospects for employment in her condition. The choices before her were uniformly bleak, each path leading toward uncertainty and potential danger. For her children, Tom listened to their discussion while pretending to busy himself with unnecessary tasks around the cabin, his mind working through possibilities and complications with the same methodical approach he had once applied to engineering. Problems. The solution that emerged seemed both obvious and terrifying, requiring him to step far outside the boundaries of the life he had built for himself. Dr. Foster's departure left a heavy silence in the cabin, broken only by the children's quiet play and the crackling of the fire. Emma sat staring into the flames, her hands resting protectively over her swollen belly, clearly struggling with decisions that offered no easy answers. Tom watched her profile in the firelight, noting the way worry had etched fine lines around her eyes and the manner in which she unconsciously straightened her shoulders whenever the children looked in her direction, determined not to let them see her fear. The evening meal passed with stilted conversation and long pauses, everyone aware that important decisions loomed, but uncertain how to address them directly. Lucy helped serve the simple fare Tom had prepared, her small hands careful with the plates and cups, while Rose and Lily chattered about Rex and the snow and the pretty light that came through the cabin windows. Emma praised their good behavior with gentle words, but Tom could see the effort it cost her to maintain such composure. After the children were settled for the night, their breathing deep and even in the peaceful sleep of the very young, Tom and Emma sat before the dying fire in the awkward intimacy of shared space and unspoken concerns. The silence stretched between them, filled with all the words neither seemed able to speak, until Tom finally found the courage to voice what had been growing in his mind throughout the day. His proposal came quietly, without elaborate speeches or romantic declarations. Delivered in the same straightforward manner he might use to discuss crop rotation or timber cutting. He offered his cabin as a permanent home, his protection as a guarantee of safety, and his name as a shield against the harsh judgments that society often passed on women in difficult circumstances. The arrangement would be practical rather than passionate, he explained, designed to provide security for her and the children, while asking nothing of her except the opportunity to help. Emma's response revealed the depth of her desperation and the strength of her character in equal measure. She had been raised to believe that marriage was a sacred institution built on mutual affection and shared values, not a business arrangement designed to solve practical problems. Yet she also understood that her options were severely limited, and that pride was a luxury she could no longer afford when her children's welfare hung in the balance. The conversation continued deep into the night, covering practical matters of daily life, financial arrangements, and the expectations each would have of the other. Tom spoke of his need for companionship without demanding romance, his desire to provide for a family without insisting on traditional marital privileges, and his belief that children needed stability more than anything else the adult world could offer them. Emma listened with the careful attention of a woman who had learned that words could carry hidden meanings and that promises were only as reliable as the character of those who made them. She asked pointed questions about his past, his intentions, and his understanding of what life with 3 energetic children would actually entail. Her intelligence was evident in the way she evaluated his responses, testing for consistency and sincerity, while clearly struggling with the enormity of the decision before her. Dawn arrived with Emma's tentative acceptance of Tom's proposal, offered with the caveat that either party could reconsider if the arrangement proved unsuitable. It was hardly the romantic beginning most brides dreamed of, but it represented hope and security in a world that had offered precious little of either. Tom felt a mixture of relief and terror at her acceptance, knowing that his quiet life was about to become something entirely different. The trip to Pine Ridge the following day served multiple purposes, allowing Dr. Foster to conduct a more thorough examination of Emma while Tom made arrangements with Pastor Hayes for a simple wedding ceremony. The children rode in the wagon, bed, bundled in warm blankets and chattering excitedly about their first real look at the town that would become their new community. Pine Ridge's residents greeted the news of Tom's impending marriage with a mixture of surprise and approval, most having long believed that the solitary mountain man needed the civilizing influence of a good woman. Sarah Wilson immediately took Emma under her protective wing, offering practical advice about local customs and available resources, while clearly delighting in the prospect of having another educated woman in the community. James Carter proved equally welcoming, extending credit for immediate necessities while discussing the various goods Emma might need to establish proper housekeeping in Tom's cabin. His wife, who helped manage the store during busy periods, was particularly enthusiastic about the children, offering to mind them while their mother attended to wedding preparations. Martha Rodriguez insisted on altering one of her own dresses to serve as a wedding gown, working with remarkable speed to create something appropriate for the occasion. The seamstress possessed an intuitive understanding of what the ceremony meant to Emma, recognizing that even a practical marriage deserved some acknowledgement of its significance. The wedding itself took place 3 days later in the small chapel, attended by most of Pine Ridge's residents who had closed their businesses for the occasion. Pastor Hayes conducted the service with dignity and warmth, emphasizing the sacred nature of the vows while acknowledging the unusual circumstances that had brought the couple together. Lucy, Rose, and Lily served as flower girls, scattering pine needles down the aisle with great seriousness and obvious pride in their important roles. Tom wore his one good suit, brushed and pressed for the occasion, while Emma looked radiant in Martha's carefully altered dress, her pregnancy lending her a glowing beauty that drew admiring comments from the assembled women. The vows they exchanged were traditional in form, but carried deeper meaning given the circumstances, representing not just a union between two people, but the formation of a family built on mutual respect and shared commitment to the children's welfare. The reception that followed was a community affair, with each family contributing something to the celebration. Tables groaned under the weight of donated food, and someone had brought a fiddle to provide music for the modest dancing that followed. The meal, Emma found herself warmly welcomed by the other women, who seemed genuinely pleased to have another mother in their midst and eager to share advice about raising children in frontier conditions. Tom watched his new wife navigate the social obligations with grace and genuine warmth, noting how naturally she interacted with the children who gathered around her, and how readily she laughed at the gentle teasing directed his way by men who claimed they never thought they would see him married. The triplets basked in the attention showered upon them, clearly enjoying their roles as the center of so much positive focus. The return journey to the cabin that evening carried a different weight than any of their previous travels together. They were no longer strangers thrown together by circumstance, but a family, however unconventionally formed, heading home to begin the complex process of building a life together. The children fell asleep in the wagon bed, exhausted by the excitement of the day, while Tom and Emma rode in comfortable silence, each lost in thoughts about what the future might hold. The cabin welcomed them with warmth and familiar comfort, but it felt different now, charged with new possibilities and responsibilities. As Emma tucked the children into their beds and Tom banked the fire for the night, both understood that they had crossed a threshold from which there could be no simple return. They had chosen each other, not from passion but from need and hope, and now they would discover whether such foundations could support the weight of genuine partnership. The mountain man who had rescued them from the snow had become something more than a protector. He was now a husband and father, roles that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself and his capacity for love. The quiet integration of their new family life was about to begin, but neither Tom nor Emma could imagine the tests that lay ahead, or the ways in which their practical arrangement would be transformed by the unexpected challenges that frontier life had waiting for them. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a warmth that seemed to promise new beginnings for the Bennett family. Emma's pregnancy had progressed smoothly through the winter months, her health improving steadily, under Dr. Foster's careful supervision and Tom's attentive care. The triplets had adapted to mountain life with the remarkable resilience of children, their voices filling the cabin with laughter and their endless questions keeping both adults constantly engaged. Tom had expanded the cabin during the coldest months, adding a proper bedroom for Emma and the girls, along with a larger kitchen area that could accommodate their growing family's needs. His carpentry skills, honed during his military service, proved invaluable as he crafted furniture scaled to the children's size and created storage solutions for the accumulating possessions that marked their transformation from temporary guests to permanent residents. The changes went beyond mere physical accommodations. Tom found himself adopting different rhythms, adjusting his work schedule to include time for teaching Lucy her letters, helping Rose with her careful drawings, and indulging Lily's endless desire for stories about the animals that lived in Whispering Pines Forest. Emma had taken over the domestic responsibilities with quiet efficiency, transforming their meals from simple sustenance into occasions for family conversation and connection. The community of Pine Ridge had embraced their unusual family with genuine warmth, particularly after Emma volunteered to assist Sarah Wilson with the younger children at the schoolhouse. Her education and natural teaching ability quickly made her indispensable, and she found deep satisfaction in contributing to the community that had welcomed them so generously. Dr. Foster made regular visits throughout Emma's pregnancy, each time expressing satisfaction with her patient's progress and growing confidence that the birth would proceed without complications. The doctor had also become a friend and confidant, someone with whom Emma could discuss the complex emotions surrounding her marriage of convenience and her growing feelings for the man who had saved them. Tom's feelings were evolving as well, though he struggled to understand or express the changes occurring within him. The practical arrangement he had proposed was becoming something deeper and more meaningful, though neither he nor Emma had spoken directly about the affection that was clearly developing between them. They moved around each other with increasing ease and comfort, their conversations ranging from practical matters to shared observations about the children's development and dreams for their future. The first real test of their new life came with the arrival of Marcus Caldwell in Pine Ridge during the last week of March. Caldwell represented a cattle syndicate based in Denver, and his interest in the valley's grazing potential immediately raised concerns among the established ranchers and homesteaders. His manner was polished and professional, but his questions about land ownership and water rights carried an underlying threat that made several families uncomfortable. James Carter was the first to express concern, mentioning to Tom during a supply run that Caldwell had been asking specifically about properties with unclear titles or owners who might be persuaded to sell. The cattle syndicate's reputation for aggressive acquisition tactics was well known throughout the territory, and their methods often involved legal challenges, economic pressure, and occasionally more direct forms of intimidation. Sheriff Miller had received reports from neighboring counties about the syndicate's activities, describing a pattern of behavior that began with polite inquiries and escalated through various forms of pressure until resistant property owners found themselves facing impossible circumstances. The sheriff's concerns were shared by Pastor Hayes, who had heard similar stories from traveling ministers about communities that had been fundamentally altered by the syndicate's presence. Tom's military experience had taught him to recognize the signs of an approaching conflict, and Caldwell's presence in Pine Ridge triggered instincts that had been dormant since his discharge. The cattle syndicate's interest in the valley was clearly more than casual, and their resources far exceeded anything the individual homesteaders could marshal in their own defense. Emma sensed the change in Tom's demeanor before he spoke of it directly, noting the way his attention turned frequently toward the valley below and how his conversations with visiting neighbors took on a more serious tone. The children noticed as well, with Lucy asking why Papa Tom looked worried and whether they would have to move again. Her question revealed how quickly the triplets had come to think of the cabin as their permanent home and Tom as the father figure they had never known. The situation escalated when Dr. Foster arrived at the cabin one afternoon with disturbing news about her own property. Caldwell had visited her office, ostensibly seeking medical attention for a minor injury, but actually conducting a careful assessment of her land holdings and business operations. His questions had been probing and uncomfortable, focusing particularly on her status as an unmarried woman operating a medical practice in frontier conditions. The doctor's account troubled Tom deeply, not only because of the implicit threat to someone he considered a friend, but because it revealed the syndicate's willingness to target vulnerable individuals. Dr. Foster's position in the community was secure but legally precarious, as territorial laws provided limited protections for women operating independent businesses. Her medical skills made her invaluable to Pine Ridge, but that same value made her a potential target for pressure tactics. Emma's advanced pregnancy added another layer of complexity to their situation, as the stress of potential conflict posed risks to both her health and that of their unborn child. Dr. Foster had emphasized the importance of maintaining calm conditions during the final weeks before delivery, advice that seemed increasingly difficult to follow as tensions in the valley continued to escalate. The children's routine provided some insulation from adult concerns, but their perceptive nature meant that completely shielding them from the growing anxiety was impossible. Lucy had begun asking more pointed questions about strangers in town, while Rose watched everything with her characteristic intensity, clearly sensing that something important was happening even if she couldn't articulate her concerns. Lily remained her cheerful self but clung more closely to Tom and Emma, as if seeking reassurance from their presence. Tom's response to the emerging threat drew upon both his military training and his deep understanding of the terrain around their home. He began making subtle preparations, checking his weapons, reviewing possible defensive positions, and ensuring that their supplies could sustain them through a prolonged period of isolation if necessary. His actions were careful and methodical, designed not to alarm Emma or the children while still addressing legitimate security concerns. The community response to Caldwell's presence varied considerably, with some residents expressing willingness to consider the syndicate's offers, while others remained firmly opposed to any outside interference. These divisions created tensions that had not previously existed in Pine Ridge, as neighbors who had always cooperated found themselves on different sides of an increasingly contentious issue. Sarah Wilson emerged as one of the most vocal opponents of the syndicate's presence, arguing passionately that the community's character and independence were worth more than any financial inducements Caldwell might offer. Her position as the schoolteacher gave her considerable moral authority, and her arguments resonated with many families who had come to the valley seeking freedom from exactly the kind of corporate control the syndicate represented. James Carter found himself in a more difficult position, as his business relationships required him to maintain neutrality, while his personal sympathies lay with those opposing the syndicate. His store served as an unofficial information hub, and he was often the first to learn about new developments in the growing conflict. Pastor Hayes used his pulpit to address the situation obliquely, preaching about the importance of community solidarity and the dangers of allowing material concerns to override moral obligations. His sermons drew larger than usual congregations as people sought guidance about decisions that would affect not only their own families, but the future character of their community. The tension reached a new level when several homesteaders reported finding survey stakes on their properties, placed without permission or notification by men working for the syndicate. The legal implications of such actions were unclear, but the message was unmistakable. Caldwell's organization was moving beyond polite inquiries to more assertive tactics. Tom's response to this escalation was swift and decisive. He organized a meeting of the affected property owners, using his military experience to coordinate a unified response to what was clearly becoming an organized campaign against the community's independence. His natural leadership abilities, dormant since his discharge, reasserted themselves as he helped his neighbors understand the nature of the threat they faced and the importance of presenting a united front. Emma watched her husband assume this leadership role with a mixture of pride and concern, recognizing both his competence and the personal risks involved in opposing an organization with the syndicate's resources and reputation. Her own background had included enough legal education to understand the complexities of territorial property law and the ways in which determined adversaries could manipulate legal processes to achieve their goals. The meeting that Tom organized drew nearly every homesteader in the valley, creating the largest gathering Pine Ridge had seen since its founding. The discussions were heated but productive, resulting in agreements to share information, coordinate legal responses, and support any families that might face individual pressure from the syndicate. Dr. Foster's participation in these discussions proved particularly valuable, as her medical practice had given her insights into the syndicate's activities in other communities. She shared stories about the long-term consequences of corporate control over local resources, describing how communities lost not only their economic independence, but also their social cohesion when outside interests gained too much influence. The solidarity demonstrated at the meeting seemed to strengthen the community's resolve, but it also marked them as organized opposition to the syndicate's plans. Caldwell's response was swift and multifaceted, beginning with increased legal pressure on families with questionable land titles and escalating to more direct forms of intimidation. Emma's labor pains began on a morning when storm clouds were gathering over Eagles Peak, both literally and figuratively. The timing seemed symbolic of the convergence of personal and community crises that would test everything Tom and Emma had built together. Dr. Foster arrived as the first contractions intensified, bringing with her not only medical supplies but also news that Caldwell had filed legal challenges against 3 families' property claims. The birth proceeded smoothly despite the external pressures, resulting in a healthy son whose arrival brought joy even amid the surrounding uncertainties. Tom held his new son with wonder and fierce protectiveness, understanding that the child represented both the culmination of their family's formation and a new vulnerability that their enemies might attempt to exploit. Emma's recovery was complicated by news that reached them during her confinement. 2 families had received formal notices questioning their land titles, while Sheriff Miller reported incidents of property damage that seemed designed to encourage voluntary departures from the valley. The pattern of escalating pressure was becoming clear, and Tom realized that their quiet mountain life was about to face its most serious challenge. The mountain man who had once sought only solitude now found himself responsible for protecting not only his own family but also a community that looked to him for leadership. The cattle syndicate represented a threat unlike any he had faced before, one that would test not only his courage but also his ability to unite others in defense of everything they had worked to build in Whispering Pines Valley. The June morning when everything changed began like any other, with Tom feeding the animals while Emma nursed their infant son Samuel on the cabin's front porch. The triplets played in the yard under her watchful eye, their games involving elaborate scenarios with dolls and carved wooden animals that Tom had crafted during the long winter evenings. The peaceful domesticity of the scene belied the tensions that had been building in the valley for months. Marcus Caldwell's latest escalation came in the form of hired men who began appearing throughout Pine Ridge, ostensibly seeking employment, but clearly conducting surveillance of the community's daily routines and defensive capabilities. These men possessed a hardness that marked them as something more dangerous than ordinary drifters, and their presence created an atmosphere of unease that affected everyone from the youngest children to the most experienced settlers. Sheriff Miller found himself in an increasingly difficult position as complaints mounted about the strangers' behavior. While they committed no overt crimes, their constant presence and veiled threats pushed the boundaries of what the law could address. The sheriff's authority was respected but limited, and everyone understood that the syndicate's resources far exceeded those available to local law enforcement. Dr. Foster's practice became an unexpected source of intelligence about the syndicate's operations when several of Caldwell's men sought treatment for injuries that suggested they had been involved in activities far from Pine Ridge. The doctor's professional discretion prevented her from discussing specific details, but her growing concern was evident to those who knew her well. Her evening visits to the Bennett cabin often included whispered conversations about patterns she was observing and precautions the community should consider. Tom's response to the deteriorating situation was characteristically methodical and comprehensive. He spent long hours studying the terrain around their property and throughout the valley, identifying potential defensive positions and escape routes, while mapping the locations where the syndicate's men had established their presence. His military engineering background proved invaluable as he assessed the community's strategic vulnerabilities and began developing plans to address them. Emma watched her husband's transformation with mixed emotions, recognizing both the necessity of his preparations and the personal cost they extracted. The gentle man who had rescued them from the snow was still present, but he was increasingly overshadowed by the soldier who understood that protecting those he loved might require him to do things that would fundamentally change who he was. The children sensed the growing tension despite their parents' efforts to maintain normal routines. Lucy appointed herself guardian of her younger sisters and baby brother, developing an unusual seriousness that troubled Emma. Rose's artistic abilities found new expression in drawings that depicted their cabin surrounded by protective barriers, while Lily's natural exuberance became tinged with anxiety that manifested in more frequent nightmares and increased need for reassurance. The community meetings that Tom organized became more frequent and more urgent as reports accumulated of the syndicate's activities in neighboring valleys. Stories reached Pine Ridge of families forced from their homes through legal manipulations, of businesses destroyed by mysterious fires, and of individuals who simply disappeared when they proved too stubborn to be persuaded by conventional pressure tactics. Sarah Wilson emerged as one of Tom's most valuable allies in organizing community resistance, her teaching background having given her unusual insights into group dynamics and communication strategies. Her ability to reach both the women of Pine Ridge and their children proved crucial in maintaining morale while ensuring that everyone understood the seriousness of their situation. James Carter's store became an unofficial command center for coordinating defensive preparations, with his business relationships providing cover for activities that might otherwise attract unwanted attention. His wife Mary proved equally valuable, using her extensive network of correspondence with family members in other territories to gather intelligence about the syndicate's operations and methods. Pastor Hayes found his role expanding beyond spiritual guidance to include serving as a mediator when community discussions became heated and divisions emerged about how best to respond to the syndicate's pressure. His moral authority helped maintain unity even when fear and frustration threatened to fracture the cooperation that was essential to their survival. The first direct confrontation came when 3 of Caldwell's men attempted to intimidate Martha Rodriguez by questioning her immigration status and suggesting that her tailoring business might face unexpected difficulties if she continued to support community resistance efforts. Their mistake was conducting this conversation within earshot of several other women who immediately summoned help. Tom's response was swift and decisive, arriving at the tailoring shop with Sheriff Miller and several other men before the intimidation could escalate to physical threats. The confrontation remained verbal, but the message was clear on both sides. The community would not tolerate attacks on its most vulnerable members, while the syndicate was prepared to use any available leverage to achieve its goals. Emma's role in these defensive preparations was complicated by her responsibilities as a new mother and her growing recognition that her own background might be relevant to their struggle. Her education had included enough legal training to understand the complex property laws that the syndicate was manipulating, and she began researching precedents that might provide legal defenses for the community's position. The discovery that Emma possessed legal knowledge represented a significant development in the community's defensive capabilities, as it reduced their dependence on lawyers who might have conflicting loyalties or insufficient understanding of local conditions. Her research revealed several cases where similar syndicate activities had been successfully challenged, providing hope that legal resistance might be possible. Dr. Foster's medical practice took on new dimensions as she began treating an increasing number of injuries that resulted from confrontations between residents and the syndicate's men. Her clinical observations provided valuable intelligence about their adversaries' capabilities and limitations, while her professional relationships with doctors in other communities yielded crucial information about the syndicate's standard operating procedures. The summer heat seemed to intensify every aspect of the conflict, with tempers running shorter and patience wearing thinner as the standoff continued. Families began making difficult decisions about whether to accept the syndicate's offers or continue resistance that was becoming increasingly costly and dangerous. Tom found himself serving as both military leader and counselor, helping families evaluate their options while maintaining the unity that was essential to any successful resistance effort. His natural leadership abilities had been honed by months of crisis management, and people throughout the valley increasingly looked to him for guidance about decisions that would affect their children's futures. The syndicate's response to the community's organized resistance involved escalating legal challenges combined with more subtle forms of economic pressure. Businesses that supported the resistance found their supply chains disrupted, while families faced unexpected difficulties with banking and credit arrangements that had previously been routine. Emma's research into legal precedents revealed that the syndicate's tactics, while effective, operated in legal gray areas that might be vulnerable to challenge if the right arguments could be presented to sympathetic courts. Her growing expertise in territorial property law made her an increasingly valuable resource for families facing legal challenges to their land titles. The children's adaptation to the crisis revealed both their resilience and their vulnerability, with Lucy assuming responsibilities that were far beyond her years while Rose and Lily struggled to understand why their previously secure world had become uncertain and frightening. Samuel's presence added both joy and additional protective instincts that made every decision more complex and emotionally charged. Dr. Foster's expanding role in the resistance effort reflected the ways in which the crisis was transforming everyone's understanding of their capabilities and responsibilities. Her medical skills provided essential support for the community's defensive efforts, while her professional relationships offered access to resources and information that proved crucial to their survival. The establishment of communication networks with other communities facing similar pressures represented a significant development in the resistance effort, as it provided both intelligence about the syndicate's methods and evidence that successful resistance was possible. These connections also offered hope for coordinated responses that might be more effective than isolated community efforts. Tom's military background proved invaluable in training other men to serve as effective defenders of their properties and families, but the responsibility of potentially leading neighbors into violent conflict weighed heavily on his conscience. His understanding of combat's realities made him acutely aware of the costs that might be extracted from families who had come to the valley seeking peace and prosperity. The syndicate's patience was clearly wearing thin as summer progressed without the quick capitulation they had apparently expected. Caldwell's increased presence in Pine Ridge and the arrival of additional hired men suggested that more direct confrontation was approaching, forcing the community to make final preparations for conflicts that might determine not only their economic future, but their physical survival. Emma's pregnancy recovery was complicated by the stress of ongoing crisis management, but her determination to contribute meaningfully to their defensive efforts continued growing stronger. Her combination of legal knowledge, organizational skills, and deep commitment to protecting her family made her an increasingly important figure in planning the community's response to whatever escalation might come. The late summer evening when armed riders began appearing on ridgelines around the valley marked the end of any pretense that the conflict could be resolved through purely legal or economic means. Tom's preparations for defending their community were about to face their ultimate test, while Emma and the children would discover whether the bonds they had formed were strong enough to survive the violence that frontier life sometimes demanded. The attack came at dawn on the first day of September, when morning mist still clung to the valley floor and most families were just beginning their daily routines. Tom had anticipated the timing, understanding that Caldwell's military advisors would choose the hour when visibility was poorest and defenders would be least prepared. His preparations proved crucial as the sound of approaching horses echoed through the thin mountain air, carrying with it the promise of violence that had been building throughout the summer. Emma had spent the night in fitful sleep, baby Samuel restless in her arms, as if sensing the tension that permeated their cabin. The triplets had been unusually quiet the evening before, with even Lily's characteristic chatter subdued by an atmosphere that children could feel, but not fully understand. Tom had checked and rechecked his weapons, his movements betraying the controlled anxiety of a man who knew that everything he held dear was about to be tested by forces beyond his control. The first shots rang out from the direction of Pine Ridge, sharp cracks that split the morning silence and sent birds exploding from the trees in panicked flight. Tom's network of early warning signals activated immediately, with mirror flashes from strategic positions confirming that Caldwell's forces were attacking multiple targets simultaneously in an attempt to overwhelm the community's coordinated defenses. Dr. Foster had converted her clinic into a field hospital the night before, working with Martha Rodriguez and several other women to prepare for casualties that everyone hoped would not materialize but feared were inevitable. Her medical training had included emergency procedures, but nothing had prepared her for the possibility of treating neighbors and friends injured in a battle for their community's survival. Sheriff Miller found himself coordinating a defense effort that exceeded anything his law enforcement experience had encompassed, relying heavily on Tom's military expertise while trying to maintain some semblance of legal authority in a situation that had moved far beyond conventional legal remedies. His small jail had been reinforced to serve as a strongpoint, with Sarah Wilson and several other women stationed there to coordinate communications between the various defensive positions. The syndicate's attack revealed the extent of their preparations and resources, with coordinated strikes against the schoolhouse, general store, and several isolated homesteads designed to fracture the community's unity and force individual families into vulnerable positions. Caldwell's strategy was sophisticated and ruthless, targeting both the physical infrastructure that held the community together and the coquetting psychological bonds that had made their resistance possible. Tom's response demonstrated how completely his role had evolved from solitary mountain man to community leader, as he moved between defensive positions with tactical precision while maintaining communication with isolated families who might otherwise have been overwhelmed by superior numbers. His military training had prepared him for such coordination challenges, but the personal stakes involved made every decision more complex and emotionally charged. Emma's contribution to the defensive effort proved more significant than anyone had anticipated, as her legal research had revealed procedural irregularities in the syndicate's property claims that could be exploited if they survived the immediate crisis. Her preparation of documentation that challenged the legal foundation of Caldwell's activities represented a strategic weapon that complemented the community's physical resistance efforts. The fighting that erupted throughout the valley was unlike anything most residents had experienced, with professional gunmen employed by the syndicate facing determined homesteaders who were defending not just property but their vision of what frontier life could become. The moral clarity that motivated the defenders proved to be a significant advantage, as men and women fought with the desperate courage of people, protecting everything they valued most. James Carter's store became a crucial strongpoint when several families took shelter there, with his building's stone foundation and strategic location providing excellent defensive advantages. His wife Mary proved unexpectedly capable with a rifle, contributing to the defense while coordinating supply distribution to other positions throughout the community. Pastor Hayes found his chapel serving as both a refuge for non-combatants and a symbol of the community's determination to preserve the values that had drawn them to Pine Ridge. His presence provided moral support that proved as important as ammunition in maintaining the defenders' resolve when the fighting was most intense and the outcome most uncertain. The children's safety became a paramount concern as the battle intensified, with secure locations established in reinforced basements and root cellars where families could shelter while the fighting raged overhead. Lucy's natural leadership abilities emerged even in these frightening circumstances, as she helped comfort younger children while keeping her sisters calm despite the terrifying sounds that penetrated their hiding places. Dr. Foster's medical expertise proved crucial as the first casualties began arriving at her makeshift hospital, with injuries ranging from minor wounds to serious trauma that tested both her surgical skills and her emotional resilience. Her ability to remain calm under pressure helped maintain morale among the defenders, who knew that competent medical care was available if they were wounded. The turning point in the battle came when Tom led a small group of men in a flanking maneuver that exploited his intimate knowledge of the mountain terrain to attack Caldwell's command position from an unexpected direction. The success of this assault disrupted the syndicate's coordination and forced them to fight as individual units rather than as a coordinated force. Emma's role during the crisis extended beyond her legal contributions to include coordination of civilian evacuation procedures and maintenance of communication lines between defensive positions. Her organizational skills and calm demeanor under pressure proved invaluable in managing the complex logistics of community defense while caring for an infant and ensuring her daughter's safety. The syndicate's professional gunmen found themselves facing opponents who possessed superior knowledge of local terrain and stronger motivation to continue fighting despite casualties and setbacks. The homesteaders' willingness to accept significant risks in defense of their community gradually wore down attackers who had expected quick capitulation when faced with overwhelming force. Sheriff Miller's coordination with Tom's tactical leadership created an effective command structure that maximized the community's defensive capabilities while maintaining legal legitimacy for their resistance efforts. His law enforcement authority provided a framework for organizing civilian participation in combat operations that might otherwise have devolved into chaotic individual actions. The women of Pine Ridge demonstrated remarkable courage and resourcefulness during the fighting, with many contributing directly to defensive operations while others maintained essential support services that kept the community functioning under extreme pressure. Their participation in combat roles challenged traditional gender expectations while proving essential to the community's survival. Martha Rodriguez's tailoring shop became an ammunition depot and equipment repair center, with her mechanical skills proving unexpectedly valuable in maintaining weapons and creating improvised defensive materials. Her immigrant background had given her experience with persecution that made her particularly determined to resist the syndicate's attempts at intimidation and control. The tide of battle shifted decisively when reinforcements arrived from neighboring communities that had been organized through Emma's communication networks and Dr. Foster's professional relationships. These allies brought not only additional manpower but also news that similar attacks in other valleys had been successfully repelled through coordinated resistance efforts. Tom's leadership during the climactic phase of the fighting revealed how completely he had embraced his role as protector of the community, coordinating complex tactical maneuvers while maintaining awareness of every family's safety and welfare. His transformation from isolated mountain man to community leader was complete, but the personal costs of accepting such responsibilities were evident in every decision he made. The final confrontation between Tom and Caldwell took place near the original cabin where Emma and the children had first found safety, creating symbolic resonance that emphasized how much their lives had changed since that desperate winter night. The syndicate leader's defeat marked not just a tactical victory, but the vindication of values that had motivated the community's resistance from the beginning. Emma's legal documentation proved crucial in the aftermath of the fighting, as territorial authorities investigating the conflict found clear evidence of the syndicate's illegal activities and fraudulent property claims. Her research had created a legal foundation for prosecuting those responsible while protecting the community from future similar attacks. The children's resilience during the crisis revealed both their strength and their need for security, with Lucy, Rose, and Lily adapting to extraordinary circumstances while maintaining the essential innocence that made their protection worthwhile. Samuel's presence throughout the conflict served as a constant reminder of the future they were fighting to preserve. Dr. Foster's medical work during and after the battle earned her recognition throughout the territory as both a skilled physician and a courageous defender of her community. Her example inspired other professional women to consider frontier communities as places where their skills could be fully utilized and appreciated. The community's victory over the syndicate attracted new settlers who were drawn by stories of successful resistance to corporate intimidation and the democratic values that had motivated Pine Ridge's defense. These newcomers brought skills and resources that strengthened the community while sharing the commitment to independence that had made victory possible. Tom and Emma's marriage, which had begun as a practical arrangement for mutual benefit, had been transformed by shared struggle into a partnership based on deep love and mutual respect. Their relationship had evolved through crisis into something that neither had expected, but both had discovered they needed more than they had ever imagined. The cabin that had once sheltered a desperate family from a winter storm became the heart of a thriving homestead where children's laughter echoed through rooms that had been expanded to accommodate their growing family's needs. Tom's addition of a workshop where he could teach his sons and daughters practical skills symbolized his commitment to passing on values that would sustain future generations. Emma's establishment of a small school in their home, where she could provide advanced education for children throughout the valley, represented her contribution to building the kind of community she wanted her children to inherit. Her teaching combined academic subjects with practical skills that would prepare students for success in frontier conditions. The mountain man who had rescued a pregnant woman and 3 small children from a blizzard had discovered that his cabin truly had needed children's laughter to become a complete home. The family that had been formed by desperation and sustained by practical necessity had grown into something that enriched not only their own lives, but the entire community that had embraced them. Pine Ridge itself had been transformed by the crisis from a collection of individual homesteads into a genuine community with shared values and collective strength that could resist future challenges. The networks of cooperation and mutual support that had developed during the conflict created a foundation for prosperity and growth that would benefit generations of residents. The legal precedents established by Emma's research and the community's successful resistance became models for other settlements facing similar corporate pressure, creating a legacy that extended far beyond Pine Ridge to influence territorial development throughout the region. Their victory had implications that reached beyond their own immediate circumstances to affect the broader struggle between individual rights and corporate power. Dr. Foster's expanded medical practice served communities throughout the mountain region, with her reputation for skill and courage attracting patients from hundreds of miles away while providing Pine Ridge with a level of medical care that rivaled much larger settlements. Her success demonstrated the opportunities that frontier communities could offer to qualified professionals willing to embrace their challenges. Sheriff Miller's law enforcement career advanced rapidly after his handling of the syndicate crisis, with territorial authorities recognizing his ability to maintain order while respecting individual rights and community values. His example influenced law enforcement practices throughout the region while ensuring that Pine Ridge maintained its reputation for justice and fairness. The children who had been protected during the community's struggle grew up understanding both the value of what they had inherited and their responsibility to preserve it for future generations. Lucy's development into a young woman who combined her mother's intelligence with her father's courage exemplified the kind of citizens that frontier democracy needed to flourish. Years later, when other families faced similar crises in other valleys, they would tell the story of Pine Ridge as proof that determined communities could successfully resist forces that seemed overwhelming. The mountain man's promise to provide safety for a desperate family had expanded into a legacy of freedom and hope that inspired countless others to believe that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they stood together in defense of their shared values. The cabin that Tom had built for his own solitude had become the foundation for a dynasty that would influence the territory's development for generations to come, proving that sometimes the most important rescues are those that save not just lives but the possibility of building something better than what existed before. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.